it's important to know what your areas of professional development are and then to pursue those. The first chapter is prove yourself ready now, and I mean for promotion. That was something when I was an individual contributor, I really I wanted to determine that. And no one will sit there and say, here's the 5 steps or the 10 steps to do that. That chapter is how do you write good performance plans, good development plans, hone your skills and run projects and demonstrate leadership as an individual contributor. And then hopefully at some point, usually it's 3 or 4 years of really rock solid performance in your day job and delivering on projects, things like that, you get promoted.
Welcome to the Philip Wiley Show. Take a look behind the curtain of professional hacking and hear compelling discussions with guests from diverse backgrounds who share a common curiosity and passion for challenges and their job. And now, here's your host, offensive security professional, educator, mentor, and author, Philip Wiley.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Philip Wiley Show. I'm joined today by my friend Gideon Rasmussen. We used to work together for a while at a bank where I used to previously work out on the pen testing team. And Gideon was doing some consulting for us because he knew some of the folks in our organization, some of the leadership. We got to kind of know each other and run into each other at conferences. And Gideon just recently came out with a new book called Cybersecurity Program Design and Assessment Program Architecture, Fight the Good Fight. So this is what the book looks like, and we'll be sharing in the show notes. And along with a good discussion on Gideon's background and his advice around the subject matter he works in, we'll also discuss the book, and we'll have in the show notes how you can find the book. So welcome to the show, Gideon.
Thanks, Phillips. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you, and congrats on the book. That's a major accomplishment.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it was a lot of work. So I'm excited to see it out there. And, the whole idea behind it was to further spread practical advice. So, just to hear that people are using it is exciting to me. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great that you're offering that resource, because one of the things when I wrote my book that kind of motivated me to write the book is you run into so many people at conferences and you meet through different jobs and stuff. And you think about the advice you could share, that there's so many people that you would never come in contact with that could get very useful advice from what you have to share. And when you write a book, you're able to do that. And this book will live on, live on long past ourselves. And it's just kind of a really good way to help people on a broad scale.
Terrific.
So as far as writing a book, was it difficult or less difficult than what you thought it would be?
It was very challenging. And I suppose the good things in your life, they always are. I had written articles before, and I think for those watching this, that's a great place to start. And I really used that same technique of have an idea of what you're going to talk about and then frame that. So in an article, you might have like maybe 5 or 6 sections. This turned out to be 12 chapters. And you just then you frame within the chapters and fill it in. And it sounds easy, but you do get writer's block. So like everyone else, I've watched many shows where you see a little bit into what it's like to be an author. You also, another thing I experienced is about a year of no sleep because your subconscious works in the middle of the night and gives you ideas. So it was very challenging. But very worthwhile.
That's good. And one of the things too about it that people that haven't written a book will learn too is if they go through the writing process is all the edits and stuff that you may have the book done and going back and forth on editing, that can take a while to get through.
Yeah. And the publisher was great with that. More so, thankfully, I didn't seem to have a lot of issues with, the cybersecurity content. Thankfully, it was just more, there are times where there might be grammatical things, and really you're trying to get ideas out of your head and type quickly and move on and not lose that train of thought. And sometimes you end up making mistakes that spell check, grammar check doesn't catch. So I was very thankful to have them going through and catching some of that.
So how long did it take you to write the book?
About a year, but I was like everyone else, I have a full-time job. It's just spread between organizations. So spent a lot of time on the weekends, 4, 6 hours, sometimes both weekend days. So it was a lot of extra time. But yeah, about over a year. So I think it's good you get some coaching from the publisher, and you do sign on a specific time frame. I might have went a month or two late, which I think from what I've heard most authors do. And I really tried to kind of back my way into that schedule, and it made it something that was attainable.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. You don't know what it's like until you get into it, and I kinda question myself if I knew what it's gonna be like. I don't know that I would have done it, but I'm glad I did. I bet your wife is glad that you're done with the book.
She is, and she was very, very supportive, which is, I've been married to my wife, Mary Rasmussen, for 31 years. And as usual, she was terrific.
That's good. They're always supportive, but then you always feel bad when you're not getting to spend time with them, so it's
Yeah.
great that you have a wife that is supportive of that. So it's really important for people to have supportive spouses or partners or whatever when they're doing stuff like this. So before we get much further in the episode, I always have my guests share their hacker origin stories. So if you wouldn't mind sharing your origin story, kind of how you got started out up into what you're doing today.
Sure. So I really started in the Air Force, and, I went through tech school. And at the time when I went into the Air Force, I didn't know IT at all. I thought an icon was a statue that you hold in your hand. And I was lucky to be based at Bowling Air Force Base, DC. And I went to the Falls Church InfoSec training facility, and I ended up working in a secure facility. So about half my job was information security, and the other half at the time was Unix system administration. So I was learning both, which was terrific. When I separated from the Air Force, it was a while back, and it was information security, not cybersecurity. And I ended up having challenges in working in the infosec career field. There just wasn't a lot of demand. The threat landscape was very different back then. But over time, I transitioned back into infosec and then cyber. So it started with consulting, and working for consulting for a pharmaceutical company, for insurance company. I was around at the birth of cybersecurity insurance, which was very interesting. And I've kept up with that and the evolution of that. And then I worked for a large bank for 9 years, and I was very fortunate because they put a lot of time and energy into training for me, and gave me opportunities and allowed me to put myself at risk. So I entered as a consultant within the supplier assessment team with some other great talented folks, built out merchant PCI, then enterprise PCI. I went back to supplier assessment now as a manager, program architecture and initiations, took over the e-commerce security by design team, online banking, mobile banking, the bank's public facing website. And my final role there was a risk control officer in consumer data and analytics, where the social security numbers, dates of births are stored. And then I transitioned from all of that change and learning about program architecture by doing it. I transitioned and I became a chief information security officer of a privately owned cloud company. And then I transitioned from there to work for a consulting firm as a CISO advisor. Then as we met, Philip, I transitioned into having my own vCISO consulting practice. And it's been an intense ride, but very rewarding. And as takeaways, I think this is where you're going with the origin story. Is as takeaways, I would suggest to everyone out there, put yourself at risk within reason. If you're uncomfortable taking on a role that, though you're qualified, if you're uncomfortable with public speaking, the more you put yourself at risk and you have professional courage, the more that you're going to grow and really have a meaningful career. I tend to actually like to be an FTE, but here I am in consulting. So I think there's positive aspects to both, but I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, yeah, you sure did. It's interesting how you got your start because interesting thing with people that've been in security a very long time typically have to start out in the military because I got my start in IT in 97. I didn't move over to security until 2004, but when I was getting started out, usually companies had their network engineers managing the firewalls. There weren't, security teams, and matter of fact, the mortgage company I'd worked for, we brought in a team of guys that used to work for the government. They started a consulting company, come in to get their guidance on how to set up our firewalls, because before we had, like, some Cisco PIX firewalls, nothing super heavy duty. They came in and brought in and put in, like, federal or government grade firewalls and helped build DMZ and really modernize our security infrastructure. And so this was
You raised such an amazing topic. So I think it's very challenging now to break into the cybersecurity career field because it sounds like we have a similar experience and kind of coming up at the same time. To me, it used to be you're in infrastructure, right? And you go from IT infrastructure into, I worked with firewalls as well. And since the two of us have been in this career field, there's been the birth of cloud computing, application security, privacy, generative AI, agentic AI, and it just keeps, we'll be around when quantum computing kicks off, artificial general intelligence. So the career field has got broader and broader and still has that depth. So it's very challenging, I think, for a human being, especially someone coming up out of high school and college to develop that skill set. I think it's harder and harder to find CISOs as well.
Yeah, I agree that it's gotten so much more difficult because evolution. Because you think back when, you had firewalls and then you had intrusion detection, then intrusion prevention, and it's very minimal roles. Because the mortgage company I worked at, there were 5 of us on the team that did firewall administration. We did do some risk assessments. We all did the same thing, and then we had the IAM team that were basically manually creating users and stuff because you really didn't have the user deployment stuff, so you had to manually, uh disable and enable accounts because you didn't have all the automation back then. And so it's interesting now to see how much more complicated things have gotten. And you look at the number of breaches back then, it wasn't as bad. Most of the things we had to deal with was some of the early virus attacks like NIMDA and Code Red and some of those viruses. And I remember back then we didn't have all the automation. So when we got hit by, I think it was NIMDA, we had to bring in contract desk support specialist to take floppy disks and go down from PC to PC to clean the virus off of it. And nowadays these you got ransomware, these attacks are getting so complex. And to be a security analyst or engineer, you've really, it takes a lot of education, and it's a very difficult and vast area to learn.
Brilliant. I mean, in our time frame, the advent of how important a cyber threat intelligence program is, and then from that, not only following, for example, CISA's advice to identify and mitigate some of it, but spinning up threat hunts and threat hunts feed monitoring requirements. So it's just, it takes a lot of coordination and a lot of resources to have a modern cyber program. Brilliant.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And from a pen tester perspective, it's gotten harder to be able to get a foothold when you're doing a pen test because now these endpoint detection systems are getting so tough to get around that some cases you have to do like an assume breach pen test to be able to provide any kind of quality assessment. So it's just amazing how much more difficult things have gotten.
I think it'll be interesting. I know that Burp Suite and Kali now have some degree of generative AI integration. And I think over time, it'll be really, really interesting to see how those tools change. And when I think of how Gen AI and those types of technologies are being adopted by threat actors, I was reading something about China in the Wall Street Journal today, starting to use Gen AI. I think they were using Anthropic. So we have to get. So what does this mean in a way from a security program perspective? I've been a convert of zero trust, and obviously it's a security model, a security architecture. And I almost feel like it's a philosophy or a religion, and it's certainly something you're never done with. The emphasis to me with how technology is evolving and how everything's going to be machine speed, and the sophistication of the attacks increasing over time, even more need for zero trust.
So what would you expect? What would you recommend to someone that's like experienced in the field as far as AI goes? What's your recommendations?
Well, so I think a lot of it starts with how do you all use generative AI or agentic AI? So there's a lot of talk and a lot of focus. So I see OWASP, who I love as an organization, focusing on generative AI, agentic AI. But I think as an organization, it depends. Do you develop AI or are you consumers? So I think there's a lot of organizations that are just consumers. So I think that's the first, from a strategy perspective, where do you need to focus? It may be one or both. And then from there, part of it is the third party risk management program and making sure that as you have your contract, your contract language around, for example, don't train your models with my company data. So there's the whole piece to that, and baking AI, pure play AI controls into your TPRM program, your questionnaires, some organizations have on-site assessors. So there's that piece to it. And then in addition to that, there's just the technology in your organization. Do you have it configured appropriately? Are you allowing your end users just to go out and use the commercial implementations of things like ChatGPT? Or do you have your own internally hosted or tenant hosted Gen AI so that they're not leaking data out through those? So obviously, Philip, we could talk about this one topic for a very long time. I did recently see that Anthropic has an article out on um, insider threat of agentic AI. I think they call it agentic misalignment. And they actually had they tested 16 different types of generative AI, commercial AI, and they were able, in testing, in some very constrained ways, to get AI. The AI that they were testing thought that at 5 o'clock it was going to be turned off. And it also learned through email that this is all in a testing environment, that the exec in charge of it had an extramarital affair. So it started to blackmail him. So just so much to focus on. And I think some of it is, if you're using agentic AI, you need to have human validation in that, and you need to be monitoring it. And you need to have a lot of the controls that you'd have in place as if it were a human being, least privilege, be careful what tools it has access to. So again, we could talk about this
Yeah.
probably for a series of conversations.
So what about policy wise when it comes to AI?
So interesting, I was working with an organization, and in April of 2023, we came out with the first version of our policy. And I think some of it is educating the employees on things like generative AI hallucinates. So it'll very confidently provide a response that may be inaccurate. And it just depends on what type of data it's trained on. So I think that's a piece to it. I think it's to explain to people what the policy of the organization is. For example, if there's an internally hosted AI, to make sure they realize not to kind of go the shadow IT route and start doing work off their phone from a generative AI perspective, to make sure they're using that internal implementation. I think that's some of it. From memory in that policy, we also kind of warned people don't try to add AI, meaning even if you've locked down all of the accesses to someone adding software or browser extensions, that adding AI may be a nice way to social engineer someone into clicking on malware. So there's a litany of things.
Yeah, I like that. I think really, especially the part where you talk about educating people because, it's there, it's gonna happen. So companies really need to train people how to use AI safely. Otherwise, they're gonna run into a lot of issues if they don't.
Yeah, and there's one of the things. So I was on site a couple of weeks ago at an organization and I went through a prompt engineering deck. So, as we can both imagine, I talked about all of the risks and hallucinations and using the appropriate implementation of Gen AI. Did all of the cybersecurity pieces to that. But also, as cybersecurity professionals, we want people to listen to us. I think it's good to show them the utility of generative AI and the longer prompts. So obviously, I know that you know this, Philip, but the longer prompts you have, the less chances are that Gen AI is going to hallucinate. So, as an example, one of my very early first prompts, when, like everyone else, I was very new to it, I typed in, write me a privacy risk management policy. And it output a website privacy notice. And my first split second thought was, you know, that's not right. And I realized, oh, it's not what I meant. And I didn't write a good prompt. So that was the first time I used it. And I realized you have to get better than that. So some of it is to show them how prompt engineering can, at least in my opinion, make you so much more effective. And then it can help you innovate. I know you know this. All of whichever company's competitors are all using it. So I think every employee in all the different companies, organizations, they need to be trained not only on how to use it safely, but effectively. And I think that's a great message. If we just constantly talk about risk and cyber, people tend to tune us out. If you can blend those messages, I think it makes more of an impact.
Very good. So one of the main reasons we're having the discussion today is to discuss your new book. So if you wouldn't mind sharing about your book.
Sure, thanks. So since 2019, I think I've done 60 plus presentations, maybe 20% of that have been in person at conferences or chapter events. A lot of it is through webinars. And what I'm always trying to do is repay a debt. So if you think all of us watching this session now, and you and I, Philip, there's been people that have coached us, mentored us, taken the time to share their methodologies. And I feel like for me as a professional, that's a debt I owe. We pull things off the internet. We sit as attendees in conference sessions. So I've been trying to give back as so many people do in our community and present. So I I present Air Force crash course format. So I kid people that I present twice as many slides as anybody with any sense ever would. So it's kind of like the Federal Express commercials in the 80s, just churning through. This is how you conduct a cybersecurity assessment, 40 slides in 45 minutes. So the idea behind all of those decks, 10 or 15 of them, was always that when the attendees left, this is a concept, they could go back to work and do something different. Um, I had written, I think, 35 articles, and I got to the point where I thought, maybe I'll write a book. So I really started to think I've got so much methodology from all of these different slide decks. I'll bake it into a book. So there's some of that. There's definitely new content and ideas, but the first couple of chapters are based on professional development. So having worked at that very, very large bank, I learned very fundamentally that it's important to know what your areas of professional development are and then to pursue those. So the first chapter is prove yourself ready now, and I mean for promotion. So That was something when I was an individual contributor, I really I wanted to determine that. And no one will sit there and say, here's the 5 steps or the 10 steps to do that. So that chapter is how do you write good performance plans, good development plans, hone your skills and run projects and demonstrate leadership as an individual contributor. And then hopefully at some point, usually it's 3 or 4 years of really rock solid performance in your day job and delivering on projects, things like that, you get promoted. Team development and retention. The second chapter is a year in the life of a cybersecurity manager, going through helping people write performance and development plans in your budget. So, like many people, when I was promoted to a manager, my first couple of years were very rough because I was getting blindsided by the cadence of things like budgets. So I tried to impart in a chapter how you could get better at that and to really write the chapter I wish I had when I was younger, travel through program maturity. So, how could you take an organization that is maybe at a moderate level of maturity and bring it up over time to the risk tolerance of the organization? Influence, support, and funding. So, that was something that took me a long time. I'm sure it takes a lot of people a long time to develop those skills. You realize that you need X technology. I think about when I ran a pen test program and I'd want, Burp Suite or I'd want SANS training, things like that. And you have to be able to articulate why does that make sense from a business perspective. So many, many, many different ways of doing that, maybe 15 or 20 different techniques to influence support and funding. We already talked about cyber threat intelligence during this session. Third party risk management. I know everybody probably, if you've got a cyber background and you're watching this podcast, it's so incredibly important. So not here's the 15 steps to build a third party risk management program, but here's all the options along the way. And that is really a very much program architecture chapter, which is the focus on the book. So if you're standing up third party risk management or application security or pen testing, any number of sub programs within cybersecurity, you have to start with the exact here's the mission vision statement. Do you agree with that? Here's a process diagram. I think this is in general how would do this. And then at some point they go, it's fine. Here's minimal staffing, minimal funding, and then, process, procedure, system of record, reporting, metrics, quality assurance. So that is, I imagine people are wondering, what does he mean by program architecture? That's it. To take something from an idea to having a cybersecurity function up and running and demonstrating value and matured maybe over a 3-year multi-generational plan. I'd be remiss in cyber if we didn't talk about metrics and reporting. So I didn't just give a table of metrics. You can find that somewhere, but more how do you design and implement metrics? Some of the nuances where you don't want a process owner to become a victim of the new metric you help them create. So maybe metrics start out as a gray metric, not red, yellow, or green, and you give them 3 or 6 months to adapt when the execs see it before they get called to the carpet for something that they're just learning about, right? Insider risk monitoring and response. So it's not the totality of an insider threat program, but it's some of the basic things where you're monitoring for data exfiltration. And then if you find an insider, an authorized employee or contractor that they're taking information from the organization as an example, spin up that response plan, get HR involved, potentially try to get that data back, right? Forensics work, all of that. Also a process where whenever someone separates from the organization, you go back a month or two and look through the logs and see if there's suspicious activity. So some of that, and you get good results with that, and then you can build your insider risk management program. So in a lot of organizations, if you go insider threat is a thing, it's one of the main threat actors out there. We need to build this Cadillac program. You're not going to be successful. So it's the small things that get you results. And then over year 2 and year 3, you'll be able to do more. There's a very detailed chapter. So if someone out there is a CISSP, a CISM, you should be able to, after reading that chapter, go do your own very detailed cybersecurity assessment. I did one recently on the new NIST CSF with a lot of risk controls built beyond that. And it was 550 testing procedures and 124 artifacts. So you too can do that. And I think sometimes people mistake doing assessments for something that auditors or assessors just do. To me, if you are a manager or an exec or a CISO and you come into a new organization, you need to be able to determine very quickly what the current state is so you can drive change. And I think that's some of the skills you learn from that. And before I go on too long, Philip, crisis communications. So if there's an incident and you don't have a crisis communications function in place, holding statement templates, data breach, communications matrix, those types of things, then while we in cyber are trying to do technical incident response, we're going to be getting dragged away by execs to do what really should be done by a crisis management function. So what I've done throughout my career is I come into a new place and I try to get with, say, the PR people and coach them on how to build that program. So when and if we have a big issue, the cyber team can focus on the technical incident response. And those other people in PR and senior leadership and legal are set up for success to do those communications externally and with regulators, et cetera. Then the final chapter, thank you for your patience, Philip, is control by governance. So I think there are times where people will really kind of scoff at GRC, for example. And I think governance, I think having frameworks that you get execs to sign off on. Do you want good, reliable, stable IT that provides value? There's the ITIL, the infrastructure IT library framework. Do you want reliable cyber? There's a variety of frameworks, NIST cybersecurity framework, privacy, the NIST privacy framework, and the state laws, maybe GDPR. So I think the more that you subscribe to frameworks and you get execs to strategically say, yes, these are reputable practices from a business perspective to avoid operational risk. We want these. We want the ISO standard for business continuity and disaster recovery. You get all of that in place and it becomes easier talking about influencing and support and funding. It becomes easier to get the right things done.
Very cool. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And thanks for sharing the in-depth review of your book to share about the different chapters. It's pretty cool. Looks like this is definitely a good book for anyone that's in management or someone wanting to aspire to be a manager. Because, you kind of mentioned when you got into it, you didn't know how to do certain things. So it's really great that you're sharing your experience and showing people how to address all these different issues. It sounds like a very valuable book.
Thank you. Yeah. So it was funny. I didn't set out to write it for any particular audience, but I think you're very astute. So there's a lot of people out there that are struggling. They may have been an individual contributor for 3, 5, 7 years, and they really want to get promoted. So I think there's some of the earlier chapters that help with that. But people also want to create things and influence change. So I think the whole program architecture thing, that theme, especially the third party risk management chapter, showing you, kind of soup to nuts, what process do you go through to build any number of programs. So I think you're right. It starts from individual contributor, it goes to manager, and there's a fair amount of things in here about dealing with boards, which is very different because the CEO of an organization, the board of directors, while we come in and we believe in a lot of ways, and I do too, how important cybersecurity is, they're trying to keep the business running. There's other facets of operational risk to worry about. Um, to develop that business acumen is important as well.
Yeah, it seems very valuable too for those that have been kind of siloed because, big organizations, you're not doing everything. So you're only seeing a small piece of it. So it seems like a very good resource to learn the other areas because ultimately you're going to be a better security person or practitioner if you understand the other areas outside of just your own silo.
So you remind me of something that took me a long time to learn is not only how to write a good performance plan or development plan, but it's more so to have the right goals written and the right metrics. A lot of people don't realize that something like October or November in most medium and large sized companies, the managers will come into a room with an exec, and usually there's only 5 or 10% of the employees that can be rated exceptional, as an example. And if you're rated exceptional, then you get a nice bonus. It puts you more on the path towards promotion. So everyone wants that highest rating. And so there's some advice in there about how to write goals that just on your paper with your manager don't just show a way to exceed, but answer the so what question. Because if you do demonstrate that exceptional performance, your manager is going to have to go into a room. Most people don't realize this, with all the peer managers, and they all in aggregate are bringing too many candidates for exceptional. And what happens in that room, it's called a performance calibration session, is some of those candidates, and we never know that we're a candidate, right? They don't make it. And so they all get compared. So some of that is to really architect for yourself really challenging performance execution goals that provide business value, and being able to articulate that in the goals and kind of setting your manager or your exec up for success when they go into that room. So there's a lot of not just how to get yourself promoted, but when you're doing good work, how to get the ratings that you really deserve.
Yeah, it's very valuable information too. So if you're making a job change, you're able to share these metrics that you're able to do X in a certain time. And that's what people are really looking for in these resumes. They want these metrics to see how you improve the organization, how well you did your job. And if you can show how you measure up, it's going to go a long ways looking for jobs. And I'm sure this same type of stuff has probably helped you with some consulting roles, doing consulting work to be able to show how you've helped others be able to, translate those metrics to the potential customer to help get awarded work.
It does. And also, whether you're a manager or an exec or a management consultant like me, you get emotionally invested in the employees around you, right? And if someone's provided innovation or breakthrough results, you really want to see them not only get the recognition they deserve, but the benefits. Part of this book is you're the individual contributor, or you're the person being rated. How can you set yourself up for success? But some of it too is you're the manager going into the performance calibration session, and you're like, I know that my report has worked so hard and grown so much this year. I don't want to fail in representing them. So that's some of it too.
Very good. So this needs to be your next conference talk. You need to show people how to leverage this to get ahead in their career.
Thank you. Yeah, that is one of the presentations. If there's any number of chapters out there. So, you know, ISACA, ISC squared, ISSA, InfraGard, IAPP, all of them. One of the decks that I do is that first chapter, which is Prove Yourself Ready Now. So I'm not out here, though it may appear, trying to sell a book. I'm out here trying to, as much as I can, get this information out, whether it's presenting at a chapter or a conference. Um, I think this medium of a book, the question is, do you want to invest $50 in your career and professional development? I hope people do. I can only in a year, you know what it's like, Philip, you present, I see you everywhere, right? So we were, good on you. You go to the B-sides conferences, right? So we go to the smaller conferences, B-sides conferences. What a wonderful thing. I see you at the larger conferences too. I won't name them, right? But we can only, you and me both, we can only provide so much information there. And it's a limited audience, even if there's 500 or 1,000 people in the audience. So I know you've written a book as well. It's a book to me as a medium that it can go, I presented in Mexico City a couple of months ago. So, I'm going to Mexico City, once, maybe 2, 3 times in my life, but that book can go all over the US, South America, just like you, all over Europe. I think that that's what drives me. Can we pivot just a little bit? And I'd love to
Sure.
hear your experiences as you wrote your book. And I'm very early. This book just became available for sale. It did sell out in 90 minutes. But,
Awesome.
you know,
Congrats.
thanks. My question for you, and I really mean this, is what's it like moving forward? You know, have you had people reaching out to you, for calls on Friday mornings? Do people come up with your book? Like, what are your experiences as an author?
Yeah, so I get people that I run into that know I'm gonna be at a conference, want the book signed. I run into people, especially since my book is for people trying to get started in pen testing. So a lot of the readers are they may be brand new to security or either they're moving from one area to another. But it's so cool to go back and see someone now because the book's been out now 5 years. And so to run into people that have now been in that role for like 5 years or close to it, experienced professionals, some of them even senior level skill set now that started out with that book. And just to run into people like that, it's pretty cool because so many people I run into that said, I got started in cybersecurity, read your book, it was a big help and that kind of stuff. So it's a really good feeling. It's kind of like investing, you put this money into something, but the investment you get back to me is more valuable than the money. You're able to touch people's lives. So when you're able to find out that you positively impacted someone whenever you started out, you never thought for sure it would make that kind of impact. So it's really rewarding to see the response for people, coming to you and saying, yeah, I started my career because this book, I got into pen testing because this book is a big help. So
So it's been 5 years. Are you thinking about a second edition?
I don't know that I'd write a second edition. There's not a lot because when I wrote the book, it was about starting a career in pen testing. So really the only things that would maybe change some of the educational resources, some of the certifications. So I don't know that necessarily requires a second edition, but I've been asked to write a book on pen testing for a publisher and more of an educational book that would be something would require being updated after a certain period of time. So that's kind of in mind. And I've got another idea for another book. So I don't know which one I'm going to act on first, but the second book I just mentioned would be something that would be more long standing, wouldn't change as much as a book on educational book on pen testing because the technologies change so quickly. Just like Georgia Weidman's book that came out several years ago, because I used it for the textbook of my class when I first started teaching the pen testing class I taught at Dallas College. I was using her book, and hers come out like in 2014 because I remember after I completed my OSCP certification, I wish this book would have been out sooner because it would have helped me. And so the book hasn't been updated and they just kind of get outdated. And so it's one of the things when you write educational books like that, they're still could be helpful, but they kind of have a shelf life and need to be updated after a while.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah. I'm just, you know, I, I'm a new author, so and I'm sure everybody on the line is interested. What is the path forward? So it sounds like you've got the bug. It reminds me, and I'd be curious if this is the way that you feel. When I received my first cert, I was exhausted. Right? And you get your first cert, and I didn't think never again, but I probably thought not anytime soon. And then about a year goes by and you get kind of an itch. I don't really pursue them anymore, but then you get another one and you're learning from those certs. it's not to get the paper or the, the letters. It's you come out changed and different. So I wonder for you, is that the way some times went by since you wrote a book, and are you starting to get the itch then? Is that part of what it
Yeah,
is?
that's kinda like it, and same in a lot of other ways too, because see, I started a group called the Pwn School Project. I used to run 2 meetings monthly, one in Dallas, Texas, one in Denton, Texas, and when the pandemic hit, we went virtual, and we only had 1 virtual meeting per month. Once the pandemic ended, Dallas had such a thriving security community, but Denton, Texas, which happens to be my hometown, had no security community until I started the group. I ended up rebranding as a DEF CON group and then stepped down from the group like October of last year. But one of the things I thought about, it was just got difficult with the travel to be at that meeting every month and then having to travel 30 to 40 minutes once a month sometimes was kind of difficult to make. And when I stepped down, I thought, what's the next thing I'm going to do? Because it's not that I'm going to quit doing stuff. It's just kind of evolving. So what I've done now, if you saw on LinkedIn, I'm partnering with the people that run HughesecCon, which they're now CyberSecCon. I'm partnering with them to create CyberHackCon in Plano,
Great.
Texas
Wow.
next year. So it's kind of evolution. So you think of different things you want to do. So the book is another thing, and also podcasting has been a similar thing because with podcasting, you got the episodes out there, people are able to learn from you and your guests that otherwise would never meet me. They can go on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, these different platforms, and find the podcast, and they may never get the opportunity to meet me or my guests in public or at a conference. But the same thing as a book, you're able to get share that information out there with people. So yeah, always looking at ways to evolve and change the things that I'm doing.
It's great. And it's one of the things that's surprising to me, and perhaps it shouldn't be, is because it's the internet, right? Then you get email from not only overseas, but small countries, and you're like, wow, that I can't believe that, you know, my podcast or my video or my article or my book, whatever it is, that it has that reach. So yeah, that's kind of rewarding.
Yeah, it's pretty cool because, I'm going back again this year. I spoke there in 2023, but Black Hat Middle East and Africa, I got invited. And part of the reasons people know is either you're published, you put out a podcast, or you're a blogger or something like it, some kind of content creator, or you do a lot of public speaking. People see you through social media and be able to make those connections because there's things I've been invited to do otherwise that I wouldn't have been able to if I wasn't doing all the things, that I do, the speaking and the book and stuff.
When you were at a conference, because I think I might have done this early on, is when you're at a conference, do people walk up to you and act like, or you get that vibe like they feel like they know you, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very
And what gets
cool.
tough about it is I meet so many people sometimes that someone comes up and I'm not sure that I have met them yet or know them because I meet so many people.
Yeah. Yeah, I struggle with that too. I think it's fair if you've never really worked with someone or, broken bread with them. I think people understand, but sometimes share that anxiety.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool feeling because that's one of the things I love about the book and the podcast is getting the opportunity to meet people because as you mentioned, you know, people reading the book. So when you get to meet these people for the first time, one of my funniest interactions was at New York City Cybersecurity Summit. I think it was November of last year. I was at the booth there. The company I work for had got a booth and they had a speaking slot. So I spoke there and someone came by the booth and was sitting there talking to me and looked down at my badge and she says, "Oh, you're the guy that wrote the book."
That's great.
So it's
That's great.
some fun experiences. I've had one of my favorite experiences was at DEF CON last year. And this was funny because it's just kind of interesting how the universe or whatever, I feel like, when you do these things and you're helping, you get these positive experiences. So I was sitting down at dinner. What had happened is I was going back to the hotel with Jason Haddix and one of his friends, a guy does some contract pen testing for him. It was the last night, my last night there. It was a Saturday night. I was going home Sunday morning and we're going to have dinner together. We're just going to drop bags off at our room. So I went to my room. I couldn't get in the door. So I called downstairs from one of the lobby phone for that floor and told them my key is not working. So I called like 4 times. It was like an hour before they finally got up there. So Jason and the other guy had already had dinner, and so that ruined my dinner plans. They finally got up to my room when I went down to finally talk to them since no one's come up, and someone was up in my room fixing the lock. So I got it done. I was at dinner in the hotel having pizza, and I was really bummed out that I didn't get to have dinner with Jason. And I'm sitting there, and someone says, Philip Wiley, and then Philip Wiley. And I look, and this guy comes up to me and says, yeah, I'm a big fan of your podcast. And I was wondering if that was you. You mind if I talk? He sat down, we talked for 2 hours. And this was turned out to be such a great experience. Always loved talking to Jason, but what ended up happening, my plan B was just it just made my conference because this guy had been listening to my podcast for a while. It really helped him in his career. And so to get to meet this person. So one of my favorite things through the podcast and the book is getting to meet people.
That's brilliant. Yeah. So, one thing we should probably both stop and say to everyone out there in the audience is, if you're going to conferences, please come up to the speakers, including us. There are times where, you'll end a presentation and there's, three, five, six people. I know you pretty well, Philip. I think it's great for us. I think not just with attendees, with speakers, you're missing out if you're not sitting down. I always try to go to sit down at a table with people I don't know. So
Yes.
I'd be lying if I didn't say there are times I see buddies like you, Philip, and you want to spend time with your friends, your colleagues, sure. But you hit on something that's so important, and I think people miss out on is those conferences to meet new people and sit down and have conversations. And we're kind of discouraged from talking shop. We can talk about cybersecurity without leaking confidential information about our organization. So that you and I both are on the road a lot throughout the year, and we go to a lot of conferences. You go to way more than I do, but I think you're right. That is such a wonderful thing that we both get to enjoy, is to see all those people and sit down. But I think there's a fair amount of people at conferences that are shy or introverted.
Yes.
Along this theme of professional development, everyone, if you go to a big conference somewhere and not just see Philip or me, but just see other people, might be professional courage. Sit down and hang out, and you'll be glad you did.
Yeah, and I encourage that too. Please do, because one of the things that you have to consider, because there's times that I sit there and say, man, should I just be done with this? Think of the extra time I would have. I could take up some different hobbies. I could go to the movies more if I didn't have to do this. Or am I doing this? Is anyone getting any good out of this? Please talk to anyone. If you enjoy their content, you like their speaking or whatever, always say hello, because there's times, just like I mentioned with my experience at DEF CON, my dinner plans were ruined, I thought, but
Yeah.
then my plan B was a great experience. I was able to connect with someone, make a new friend. And for anyone doing that, when you're meeting these people, you're encouraging us to continue on, because as long as we're getting value, as long as you're getting value out of what we do, we're going to keep giving, and it just motivates us to keep doing what we're doing.
You raise a good point, and a lot of times I'm an independent consultant. I know that you transition throughout your career, throughout the time I've known you, Philip. You've been FTE, you've been consultant, but there's times where we're out there, we'll fly to New York City or somewhere across the country, and there's the flight and the hotel and you're right, we bear this ourselves. It's a cost to us, and it does really make all of us, and I think the people around you too, for the attendees, it makes everybody happy when somebody sits down and has a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes us show that, just kind of proves that what we're doing is helpful, and people continue on. So, I mean, and everyone I know typically likes people to come up and say hello to them and all that. So, and it was really had a great experience a couple weeks ago at our local B-sides. There was a young man there that had listened to one of my podcast episodes and now listens to the podcast. And he was very shy, introverted, but he said through my podcast and listening to that, he was able to get the courage up to come up and come to the conference and then say hello to me. And then we even took a picture together. I wasn't even going to recommend that because I thought this guy is doing enough to show up. but then he asked if he could have a picture with me. And so that's just, some of the things out there. So people that are listening, yeah, just to reiterate on what I was saying, or what we're saying.
You rem you reminded me of something. So I always kid people, you can tell that I care about you if I go, "I'm trying to corrupt you." So I try to corrupt people in a good way. And one of the things, there's only so many speakers out there, and I think probably everyone, and I'd be interested, try to be quick. I wanna hear what you have to say about this, Philip. But when I started to speak in public, I was terrified. I'm surprised I didn't lose consciousness. And the way it happened for me is I was moving up in my career and I became an SVP. And then about 2 weeks in, the exec walked up to me and said, "Hey, Gideon, we have a town hall a couple weeks from now. Can you get up and do, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes on the state of security in our division?" And I said, "I'm sure you would, Philip." Like, "Sure, no problem. Get right on that." And I was just abjectly terrified. And I did manage to make through that. I'm still alive today, but I went to Toastmasters, really not as much to develop public speaking skills, but to get over that fear. And then also in the beginning, I felt much more comfortable presenting, 30, 50 person chapter meeting. One day you end up on a stage in front of 500 or 1,000 people. And that was a second tier where I had to adapt. But when I say everyone on the line here, it's so worthwhile to overcome that fear. And it can drive your career forward, but it also gives you the ability to pass information on to other people. So, Philip, so I'm showing people I was terrified. Can you talk about when you first started doing public speaking and how you went from where we all start up to presenting at big conferences?
Sure. I was terrified too. And the reason I wanted to speak, but I was scared. And I did the same thing as you. They were announcing the call for papers for our local B-sides, Dallas Fort Worth. And the person announcing the call for papers said the best job they got of their career was because they spoke at conferences. So the next week I signed up for Toastmasters, and the same thing as you, I needed help speaking better, but my main thing was overcoming fear. And that's what I did, because I remember our chapter, we had a video camera and we'd video our talks. And so I remember one of the first times I watched it, I was terrified speaking, but when I saw myself on camera, you couldn't tell it. And I thought, that's good enough for me, because if people can't tell I'm terrified, then that's okay. And so the more I did it, the more I got used to it, and it doesn't bother me anymore now. You can put me in front of thousands or a million people. I'm not going to be scared. I mean, there's a little bit of nerves, but I'll do it, and I enjoy speaking. So it's kind of the same thing happened with me. And then the more practice speaking, the more times doing podcasts, being a guest on podcasts, it just helped me improve.
I think the most meaningful thing I learned from Toastmasters was they said always rehearse 3 times each day before the event. So by the time I really want to hear how you do this, Philip, because I'm embarrassed to say that by the time I get up to present, it's the 4th time in 4 days. So, but at that point, I'm not memorizing a script present. It's a little different every time, but it's more, I've found that was great advice that they gave us, that I'm not worried that I'm going to forget. Like, it just kind of flows out of you. So how do you prepare?
Yeah, for me, I really don't prepare. I write the talk. There are cases where I've been, especially back when the conferences were virtual in 2020, there were times I was still working on my talk before I gave it. And
Wow,
so,
that's amazing.
so I've done that. I'm not, and like with my podcast, I don't have a script or bullet points of
Yeah.
what I want to do. It needs to be conversational. But one of the things about it is I've been pen testing for so long. There's these different talking points. And after you've kind of talked about these things several times, it's just second nature. So there's these different talking points that you may use throughout different talks. So it's presenting that over and over again. And so like with these presentations I do, I give them so many different
Yeah.
times that it's just polished. The first time I give it might not be as good because there's some new elements to it. But then by the second or third time I've given it, it's like I've been giving it forever.
I agree. So what I do with that is, so I have 2 new decks right now, and I agree with you, like, the first couple of times you present them, I do feel a little bit more off, but I love to do webinars for that, and I always try to convince people, if, you and I are both trying to get them to break into public speaking, doing a webinar. And after COVID, there's a lot of webinars now. For your local chapter meetings, there are a fair number of chapters that are primarily remote. So it's all webinar. And you've got your slides right here, and you're just pushing the arrow button. So that's a good place to start.
Yeah, but one of the things you mentioned too about career opportunities, and back to what the person announcing our call for papers, the speaking and all the stuff I do, I'm able to make more money and get better job opportunities than I would have just staying technical.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel it's more stable. And then also, something we haven't talked about yet is, so we've both spent, we actually have some similar backgrounds, firewalls. I used to lead a big pen testing team, so I'm not anywhere near as savvy as you are, but we've got a lot of similarities. But the tech is so important. So if you want to be in cyber and you don't understand technology, infrastructure development. We're moving into AI now, but you also need those soft skills and the executive presence, whether you're an executive or not, and that emotional intelligence. So if some of those terms are new to you or on your periphery, those are good things to develop. And I think you make a great point, Philip, is that just starts to happen if you're presenting as you develop more of that ability to communicate.
Yeah, so one of the things that helps a lot too is anytime you're up there in the Q&A portion, that and this is one of the things that helped me develop my presentations. I'll get asked a question or some questions, and that kind of tells me I'm not going into enough detail, that I need to add this to it, and it helps me refine and make my talks better. But one of the things also with speaking is when you're doing the public speaking, then all of a sudden you're into thought leadership, and thought leadership brings you into a whole another level. And thought leadership is not only important to practitioners, it's really important to management types and executives, because they may not have all this time to go out and take these classes, but they're attending presentations and stuff to kind of get a quick overview of certain topics, because they don't need to know the deep details and nuts and bolts of it. And so you get into these kind of areas, you're in just a different level. You're not just a practitioner anymore. You're able to add these additional skills that can help you. And when you can present in a way that people are able to understand a topic that's technical, then it's going to make you easier for you to speak to management and business groups about a topic. That way they can understand it. And that's very valuable.
You're right. So for me, I agree with you. You overcome that fear of questions, because that is the one thing that you can't script or prepare for when you speak in public. Is somebody's going to ask a question, and execs do that too. And I always say they ask the hard questions. So you just have to be ready. One of the things I think would be good for us to share is, I feel similar to you with the questions at the end of a presentation, but I feel like if they ask questions, somehow I connected. Rarely, and it does happen to me, there's times where you get one or two, and I just feel like, is this topic that I'm talking about, is it no longer relevant, or has it gotten stale? Or so there's that piece to it. And I feel like when people ask questions, I connected, and I feel like that there's times, and I've seen it happen to you, Philip, where they'll ask questions, and the conference people are kind of giving you the hook as a speaker, because they're
Yeah.
like, the next person has to come up and they need to put the mic on. And so they'll kind of give you the hook and pull you off the stage. And I always feel like when that's done, and I've seen you do it, you kind of walk out and try to answer everybody's question. But and for those of you that see speakers at conferences, we love it when you ask questions. It feels like somehow what we did connected.
Yeah. And we see that what the presentation topic we selected was a good topic, because if no one's asked questions, you get no reaction. You kind of think, well, that kind of failed. But even back to the questions, you learn the topic so much better when you get asked all these questions. You get asked these questions and you have to answer them, or if you're on panels and stuff, getting asked questions on panels. So those are really good opportunities. They can sometimes kind of stretch you because, and one of the things too for listeners, if you're ever asked, don't ever worry about if you can't answer a question. If you can't answer the question, you can say, yeah, I don't know that topic, but if you want to get my contact information, I can research it and get back with you with the answer. But one of the things you don't want to do is you don't want to fake it and give a bogus answer. You want to give
That's
your
true.
best effort and then tell them if you can't answer your question, here's get my contact information. I can follow up with you on that.
It's brilliant. And you're right. That's a fear that I'm not just going to say that other people have. That is a fear I've had is that someone will stump me. And you're right. Over time, you learn. That's great advice, Philip. Over time, you learn, you know, all of us are human beings, each of us included. And people are going to ask you questions you don't know the answer to. And you just have to be comfortable with, let me get back to you on that. Yeah.
And that's the best lesson of it all is realizing that you don't have to know it and being good with that and be able to accept it, because otherwise when you fear it, then you finally get to the point where you don't fear it anymore. If you can't answer it, you can't answer it. But yeah.
Great. Well, this has been terrific. I was very excited and honored, Philip, when you reached out to me. This has been wonderful. Different conversations than we normally do. I think we'll probably sit down and have another one of these, at a round table at a conference somewhere. But thank you so much for inviting me. And I think this has been terrific. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for being my guest. I do a lot of podcasting because I started another podcast a while back. I'm into season 2. The seasons are quarterly, Simply Offensive. And then when I was at Phosphorus, I used to do their podcast, 2 episodes a month. And I'm a guest on a lot of podcasts. And you get down towards the end of the year, you're starting to get tired, and I always buffer in a little break. So like December, I'm doing very little recording to none. And one of the things I have to say, this is the most fun I've had in a long time. We got into, covering the book, but then we got into the other conversations. This was a lot of fun and good to catch up with you and get the chance to speak for a while. Cause a lot of times we see each other at conferences, we don't get a lot of time to speak. So this was a lot of fun.
This is great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thanks everyone for
All right.
joining, and we'll share the information on the book and how to get in touch with Gideon in the show notes. We'll put his LinkedIn up there as well as a link to the book. So check it out. If you like the podcast, subscribe and share with your friends. And until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to The Philip Wiley Show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, to learn more about Philip, go to thehackermaker.com and connect with him on LinkedIn and Twitter @Philip Wiley. Until next time.